So that year, I was determined to come and find my dissertation topic. I did not know what I wanted to write on. And we came across Heracles and some cult installations for the hero Heracles, otherwise known as Hercules in the Roman world, in a lot of different sites. And people did reports on them. And I was like, but what was the cult about? What was the cult? And there was nothing written about it. So I decided to write my thesis on the cult of Heracles. And I limited it to a part of Greece called the Peloponnesus, the southern part of Greece. And I started by looking at, Heracles's famous 12 labors. So I looked at, he did 6 of them in the Peloponnesus. So I looked at the 6 labors he did in the Peloponnesus. And we had gone to all of those places when we did this year-long program. And I realized all of those places had Bronze Age, that is very early, 3000 BCE, installations that controlled water, dams, canals, channels. And I thought, what if these myths were commemorating age-old technology that the Bronze Age people developed to clear swampland from these areas and create an area that was suitable for agriculture? Now, in some places, this was more obvious in the archaeological record than others. And one of them is at Lerna. There are some where Heracles fought the Hydra. The Hydra is a monster from antiquity that has anywhere from 3 to 1,000 heads, depending on who you read in literature. And those heads are snaky. And she lives in a swamp. And she's stinky and noxious. And one of the things that's difficult about fighting her is you cut off one of her heads and 2 more will grow back. And in reading all of the literature that describes this labor of Heracles, I realized that this could be a description of what it's like to control the multiple water sources in a swamp. If you block up one passageway in, 2 other things spring out at the side and still fill the swamp. And so Heracles solved this problem by cauterizing the heads of the Lernaean Hydra, and then dried her up and then reclaimed the land for agriculture. And lo and behold, there have been great geomorphological studies of this plain where Lerna is located. And there's lots of different rivers. There are springs with named nymphs associated with them. And controlling the water sources through there has been a problem throughout time. Even up into the modern period, the roadway will still flood and become muddy and kind of noxious looking. But they've done some coring down into the swamp, and they can actually determine that there were times when the water passage was controlled by looking at that coring. And so I discovered that these tales were probably encoded stories, mythologies that told a story about a great technological exploit done by hydraulic engineers in the Mycenaean period. And you don't want to talk about them, building walls and stuff like this. So they make it a story about conquering a monster. And I discovered that this was the case for the Nemean lion, for the Erymanthian boar, for the Carinian hind. All of these had some watery areas associated with them, where the control of water, the hydraulic engineering is what Heracles did. And then there are really great stories that talk about Heracles as digging ditches and being in control of rechanneling waters, the Augean stables. is a labor he does in the Peloponnesus, where he's told he has to clear the dung out of a stable, in a day. And it's just years and years and years of accumulation of dung from these animals. And he diverts the course of a river through the stable, washes it clean, diverts the river back. So he's a great hydraulic engineer. And so, in trying to discover who he was in his cult aspect, which I did find interesting, very clear designations that he has there, that's how I discovered this connection with the landscape, that these myths were set in very specific types of areas where there were remains of Mycenaean dams. And that's the Bronze Age term that's the term for the Bronze Age civilization, the Mycenaeans, which many of you will have heard about.
So when I was reading your articles and listening to what you'd said just now, it's sort of, I guess, a way to think about the Greek mythologies is one of probably two ways that fit together real well. Is if these are engineering feats, they're a little bit boring to tell. So maybe someone's grandfather, to pick at their grandchild, added a layer of entertainment to it, which is not at all a reference of what my grandfather used to do to us. But anyway, we'll leave that aside. But also in many ways, it's sort of telling this is how our civilization came to be. This is how we got to where we are. This is what we had to do. And then over time, the story expands from what it maybe was initially to what it became, which reminds me a little bit of kind of the Irish legend of Cuchulainn. And because of the landscape there, maybe it was possible for one guy to defend a lot of things. But I guess maybe 7 or 8 people get merged into this one concept of Heracles. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's really true, that that a lot of great humans who did wonderful things for their community, what they did gets absorbed into this figurehead of Heracles, and and then gets worshipped, or the tales get told. But what I've often found interesting about myths is that often little details will change, but often not where they took place. So the place will always stay the same, and some of the natural features of that place, the mountain, the river, the sea, the plain, the rock in a certain area. And so what I often feel is that these myths were often put together to map the world. This is a map. It was a verbal, oral map transmitted as people went to other places. They could tell these stories of this land of Lerna, or this land of the Augean stables. Here's a tale about it, of what happened there. And then it maps that world for foreigners, for other people, and it travels.